48. I pay homage to the Gautama who, moved by his compassion toward the sacred Dharma in order to rid us of all distorted views. A Tibetan scholar adept, Great Master Tsongkhapa has made this prayer: where the Dharma has not spread and where it has spread but declined, may I, moved by great compassion, illuminate the teachings there. So places where the Buddha Dharma has not spread, either that or those places where the Buddha Dharma had spread but declined, whatever the situation, the main message of the Buddha's teaching is compassion, and therefore in this world many problems created by humans is because of lack of love and compassion. This is very clear. So if you have love and compassion, you cannot actually cause harm to others. So when you are selfishly motivated, when there's no certainty whether you would cause harm or not, but there is compassion and love, it's quite clear that harm would not be caused to others. So with regard to the promotion of the practice of love and compassion, we cannot just say, oh, the Buddha has actually said that it is important, the love and compassion are important. This will not help. But in practical terms, love and compassion helps your health, with good health and peace of mind and less sicknesses and disease, and also long life. And so love and compassion creates harmony amongst people and brings friendship. And therefore, by using our common sense, we need to see the importance of love and compassion. And so this prayer of Master Tsongkhapa is not only about spreading Buddha Dharma, but the message, the essential message, we need to spread that. It's very important for us to do that. So this is not about propagating our religion as such, but to reduce the problems that are in the world and to create more happiness in our human world, in the world itself. That is important. So the purpose of our gathering here is to create a compassionate world amongst the 7 billion people. So this is our common responsibility. And then specifically as followers of the Buddha, the teaching of the Buddha is, the specialty of it is the philosophical view. So of course the different religious traditions of the world have different philosophical ideas. Because of this is needed because of the different predispositions of the human beings. But the main message of love and compassion is shared in all religions. So with regard to the philosophical view, what is the difference? Specialty about it is that we are asked to use our intelligence to lead ourselves on the path and not merely based on faith. So the German Pope, Pope Benedict XVI, has said once that the reason and faith must go together hand in hand. So, with regard to Buddhism, with regard to the Buddhism. The Buddha himself, I mean, we do not need to find some new reasons, but the Buddha himself has actually, right from the beginning of his teaching, he told us to do research and experiment on his teaching. And therefore, in order to become 21st century Buddhists, it is very important for us to study the Dharma and understand it on the basis of through the reasoning. So, of course, in the past, people were, I mean, it may have been okay for people just to base on faith and keep their religions. But in the 21st century now, we need to learn the philosophical views of Buddhism. A practitioner of Buddhism, what kind of knowledge they should have is said in the 400 verses of Aryadeva. It says one should be unbiased, intelligent, and someone aspiring the path. So a practitioner must be impartial, not just saying, oh, I take refuge right away in the Triple Gem, but to be skeptical. And so if you don't have doubt or skepticism, you will not do any analysis, and therefore you need to be impartial. So even though you may be impartial, but if you are not able to differentiate between what is right and what is good wisdom or bad knowledge, you won't be able to differentiate that, and therefore you need to be intelligent. And then on top of that, you need to have the aspiration to seek the path. So Rinpoche, in his great treatise on the Lamrim, says, today many yogis are not learned, but the learned ones do not know the practice, the key to the practices, and therefore he says he has written this text, the great treatise on the middle way. So in those days, during the time of Rinpoche, the practitioners did not have much example or role models who were learned. So people actually made this differentiated between the theory and the practice, and then considered something which is called personal instruction from gurus as important. And Rinpoche is pointing out that we cannot make this distinction between, within the Dharma, those that are meant for theory and practice as such. You cannot make this kind of distinction. And then having become learned, they are not actually skilled in the key of the practices, not being able to integrate the teachings within themselves, although being learned. And then most people are actually, with regard to studying, they are rather, they have one-sided partiality. And so in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we have the Sakya and Garland, Gelug traditions and so forth. So people belonging to these different traditions actually stay within their own tradition and don't study the other traditions, texts of other traditions. So for example, in the Gelug tradition, they have textbooks that they use in each monastery, and the students more or less focus on their own textbooks and not others, not study others. And therefore, in the scriptures, study of scriptures, they are partial, they have partial eyes. And then there are those who do not have the intelligence to understand the import of the different scriptures. With regard to one point, for example, they can't just say, or they should not just say, oh, this is so because such and such scripture says so. And so they should have the eye of intelligence to fathom the different imports or the authentic scriptures. So today we have many facilities. The facilities are there to read books, but we need still to pay more attention. So what we need to do is being learned, we should not undermine practice, and being a practitioner, we should not undermine learning. As we said earlier in the last days, that there are only two means by which we could preserve and promote the Dharma, that are studying and to do study and practice. So before we do our study here, let's have our tea. So the qualities of the Buddha is inconceivable, the qualities of Dharma are inconceivable, and the Sangha are inconceivable. So making offering to the inconceivables has inconceivable merit. So I make offering of this tea and bread to the inconceivable ones. Chame. So with regard to philosophical view, we need to pay attention and study and understand the reasons for the different philosophical views and assertions. So if you consider this point, amongst all the different religious traditions with philosophical views and ideas. Perhaps Buddhism has the widest range of philosophical views. And amongst the Buddhist traditions, the great masters of Nalanda tradition used reason mainly, and used epistemology and logic and to analyze the teaching of the Buddha. And therefore, we have the widest range of philosophical views in the writings of these Nalanda masters. So, the Pali followers of the Pali tradition, if you could also study these texts written by the Nalanda masters, it would be helpful. So, with regard to study in Tibet, in order to be able to study well and to become a good geshe in the end, get a good degree, students study for 20-30 years. In India, after coming into exile, we have less number of monks and therefore less number of students. And so we have today, this year, we will have female geshes, geshemas, who have studied for over 20 years the philosophical texts. And therefore, with regard to studying the philosophy of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism has the greatest, does study of the texts. And therefore, studying the philosophical texts, and having done study, one should integrate the teachings in practice and thereby reach their goal of liberation. And so the Buddha's followers like Master Nagarjuna and so forth, the texts written by them were meant for us to achieve liberation and omniscience. And therefore, having studied these texts, we need to incorporate these teachings within ourselves through practice, so that we could actually know the keys to practice them. So once you have done some practice, in your practice, it is important also that the practice may not be tinged by 8 worldly concerns. And therefore, you should be learned, as well. You should have the qualities of scholarship and humility, and then practice. So these are the 3 qualities that you should build, as we say this in Tibet. And therefore, having done your studies, you need to develop these 3 qualities within yourself. And not only the monks and nuns, but even the lay people should do the same. So the main practice is to be kind, while being scholarly and humble. You should be kind, and so that you you are not tinged by the 8 worldly concerns. So if you are kind and have actually think of helping others, caring about others, then which is the message shared with other religious traditions as well, You could, with that quality, you will help poor people, needy and sick people, and then also serve and make contribution in educational field. And so, of all the religious traditions, the Christians particularly are dedicated in this field in the field of education and health care. And religious harmony also should come through this sense of kindness and caring of others, and thereby serve our communities. So whether you are a believer of the theistic religion or non-theistic religions, doesn't make a difference in this practice. Whether you are within the non-theistic ones, whether you believe in soul theory or non-soul theory, I mean, it doesn't really matter. The essence of all these religious traditions is to practice kindness and serve our communities. So the Buddha himself also was born under a tree, and he didn't become enlightened in a cave, but under the Bodhi tree. And then when he passed away, he didn't pass away in a monastery or a temple, but he passed away under trees. And in the Vinaya text, he passed away under a sala tree, and then during the rainy seasons, the monks stayed in one place. And it was not the case that the Buddha stayed only in one place all his time. And when there was the rainy season retreat, the monks were actually, after the retreat, the monks actually undertook the project of planting trees in that place. And then during the rainy season, the monks and nuns were not allowed to cut trees or fell trees, as well as the grass and so forth, and not to pollute the environment as well. So in those days, even in those days, of course, there was not a great environmental crisis and decline in the environment, but today we are in a situation where if we don't care about the environment, it's indispensable to care about the environment. So when I first came into exile, the population of the world was 6 billion. Now we are 7 billion. And at the end of this century, some say that it would be 10 billion. And then the poor people in poverty and so forth also will increase, and will have natural calamities as well. And as Buddhist practitioners, we, as in Thailand, the Vinaya holders take care of the environment, so which is very good. And so we need. I also would like to request you to take care of our environment. So I couldn't come at 8:30 because of audience. Once I start meeting people, then I can't just show my face and smile at them. But because of having this mouth, I need to talk. And so once I open my mouth, it takes 10-15 minutes with a person. So next times, maybe I should cover my mouth like the Jain practitioners, so that I wouldn't have to talk much, so that I could come sooner to give the teaching. So I'll go through the more important points of Ratnavali, the precious garland. We're on page 33, verse number I think 47 or 48. So the means to achieve higher rebirths are 16 factors, 10 virtuous actions plus 6 of other factors. So we're supposed to be doing these practices. So we should do our practices as well as encourage others and explain these practices to others as well. And with regard to a definite goodness, the goal, we need to study, reflect and meditate on emptiness. So emptiness, of course, is quite a difficult topic, but if you familiarize yourself with the topic more and more, first you do learn the words and then give thought to them, and then understand and get some understanding of the meaning and reflect on them. And so, with familiarization, having the familiarize with the word and the meaning, then you should familiarize the idea within yourself more and more, so that you have some understanding, some kind of intellectual understanding, and then that will grow into some form of experience where you think that if you actually put more effort, you could actually have the experience of emptiness and the wisdom of emptiness. And then you put effort further, and you will have that real experience. So it's like taking care of some plant, like a flower that first you have to have the seed, and then you put the manure and the water and so forth. So the seed actually grows into a sprout. So you still need to take care of that, and that it is not destroyed, and nurture it further and further so that it will grow, and the shoots will grow further, and then there will be the flower and so forth. So even in the education field, you may now have the university education and knowledge, but that's not there. When you were in kindergarten, you were just a beginner learning the alphabet, and then you slowly progressed in your knowledge. And so, as it is the case with other study of other subjects, that you need to actually progress, beginning with from the ground up. Likewise, in the case of Dharma, it is the case that you cannot just expect to have the experience right away, but you should actually first do study and gain knowledge and then understanding, and slowly build the experience within yourself, which also further grows. And so, with regard to emptiness, this is the middle way, free from the two extremes of nihilism and eternalism. So, with regard to meditation on the selflessness, a creator of our pain and pleasure, an experiencer of the pain and pleasure, is called a self. And then the psychophysical aggregates are those that are appropriated by that self. So for some, for the purpose here, we make this distinction between the self and the aggregates, the the aggregates and other phenomena. So, of course, with regard to the subtle selflessness, there's no difference in subtlety between the selflessness of persons and phenomena. But for our purpose here, we make distinction between the distinction on the basis of the aggregates and the self. So selflessness of persons on the basis of the person, and then the selflessness of phenomena on the basis of the aggregates. So a person is neither of the person is neither the water, neither the earth, nor the water and so forth. If you could find that verse. So here a person or a being is not denied, because doing so is nihilism, or nihilistic view. Verse number 83? No. No. Up there. 80. Verse number 80. On page 38. A person is not earth, not water, not fire, and so forth. And so, with regard to the body of a person, it's made up of the 5 elements of earth, water, fire, wind, and space. No. So this body is made up of these 5 or 4 elements. So it says a person is neither earth, nor water, nor fire, nor wind, nor space, and not consciousness. So those who assert a self not separated or different from the aggregates, even amongst them, there are those who assert that a self or a person must be found from amongst the aggregates, and therefore they point to the consciousness. And so, within the consciousness, there is the mental consciousness. And in the case of mental consciousness, when you faint, the gross mental consciousness also stops working. And when someone dies, the heart stops pumping blood, and then because of that, blood flow stops. The flow of blood stops into the brain stops, and when that happens, there is brain death. And even after brain death, clinical death, there are cases where people where the body of that person still does not decompose. And so clinically, the doctors would say they are dead, but the body still remains fresh. Some remains fresh for 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks even. And my own upadhyaya for my bhikshu ordination, Ling Rinpoche, Gyabje Ling Rinpoche, stayed in that state where the body did not decompose for 13 days, and then one of the previous Garden Tripas who died, the 100th Garden Tripa, body remained fresh for about 18 or 20 days. And I've heard that when that a person was actually very sick and looked very frail, and when he was alive because of sickness, but then when he died, his body actually kind of looked more fresh, and so some Geshe in Wisconsin passed away, and then the scientists who were doing some research on this Thukdam phenomena went to look at his body, and he told me, the scientist told me that it was the first time that he ever saw someone in that phenomenon called Thukdam, state called Thukdam, and he actually found the body very fresh, and that was quite amazing for him from his own experience. And so the scientist has actually started doing this research on the Thukdam phenomena. And when Gadinta Rinpoche passed away, the 100th Gadinta Rinpoche, they used certain wires on, put some wires on his head, although he was clinically dead. And from which there was some indication of something happened. And so these are facts. So we need to, therefore, explain this. The gross mind has already stopped working. So what is actually there that holds the body fresh, that keeps the body fresh, even after clinical death? So there is some cause. So if you think about the subtlety, degrees of subtlety within the mind, even within the consciousness, you cannot say this is the person. So in the Tantra, there we talk about there's differentiation between the gross or the coarse levels of mind and subtle mind. And so at the time of death, all the gross or coarse states of mind have all subsided and dissolved, but the subtle mind is still there. So with regard to this innate clear light mind, we can talk about it being dormant at some point and active at others, but we cannot talk about a person being active or dormant as such. So if you were to actually search for the person from within the aggregates, the consciousness itself, you would have to go from the sensory perceptions down to the subtlest mind, but none of them can be pointed to as being the person, and therefore not the consciousness is the person, and if not all of them, what person is there other than these? And so what this shows is that there is no person apart from the aggregates, and therefore when you search for the identity of the person, you will not be able to find any of his parts, the mind or the body, as being the person. So when someone is experiencing the clear light, you would still say, oh, there is a person there, but within that clear light mind, nothing can be pointed out as being the person, because if you were to, if you were to also say that there is a person separate from that clear light mind, that would actually be problematic. And on the basis of the bodies, we make distinction between male and female, and then also due to age, we also talk about young and old and so forth. And so you cannot actually point out a person or point to a person as someone separate from the aggregates, because we need to perceive a person on the basis of the aggregates. So these 6 elements: earth, water, fire, wind, space, and consciousness. On basis of these 6, we designate a person, and therefore you can understand that a person is dependent on other factors. Whereas for us, what appears as a person appears as if it has some solid, independent existence, and that is what we term as a true existence. Although it appears as if the person has some objective existence, independent existence, yet if you actually analyze and experiment, I mean, if there were such a person independently existing apart from the aggregates, you would have to be able to find it. I mean, it has to become clearer and clearer. Just as when you see a water from afar, and if you go nearer and nearer, you would still have the water, but the person, this independently existing person, cannot become clearer and clearer as you do analysis into it. So if the person were to have independent existence apart from the body and the mind, then you would be able to, you would have to be able to find it, but that's not the case. But then the person, it's not the case that the person is non-existent. So the existence comes on the basis of the aggregates designated. So just as a person is not real due to being a composite of 6 constituents, so each of the constituents also is not real due to being a composite. So if you were to analyze each of these aggregates, I mean, within the body, the aggregates such as the feeling and so forth, you will not be able to find anything existing objectively, just as the quantum physicists say that nothing can be objectively found. And then we also can talk about a whole and its parts. So a whole cannot be found apart from being designated, depending on the parts. If you actually dissect the thing, then into its different parts, you will not have a whole that you can point to. But apart from the the combination of all these parts coming together, you cannot have a whole. So similarly with the whole, without the whole you cannot talk of parts. So the aggregates are not the self, they are not in it, it is not in them, without them it is not. It is not mixed with the aggregates like fire and fuel. Therefore, how could the self exist? So just as it was said earlier in verse number 81, so each of the constituents also is not real due to being composite. In verse number 83, it says that 3 elements are not earth, they are not in it. So we talk about elements, where the 4 elements have come together. But each of the elements actually are posited or asserted, we establish them on the basis of some kind of a function of each of them. So when you go into the subtle elements, the subtle units of these elements, you cannot actually pinpoint some element as independently existing apart from them, the composite. So the 3 elements are not earth, they are not in it. It is not in them, without them it is not. Since this also applies to each, the elements like the self are false. And so the reasoning are all can be extended to the next verses. 84 down. The entity of the form is merely name. Because the phenomenon of form are only name. 99, verse number 99.
Okay. My sentence. Okay.
So because the phenomenon of form are only names, so if you were to look at, try to search for a form or physical matter, it does exist, but it does not exist from its own right or side. Therefore, the only thing that you can say is it exists by way of name. So in the Savatantrika Madhyamaka philosophical school, they say that things have some objective existence, and therefore the Prasangikas reject that by saying that if things were to have any in Madhyamaka Avatara, Chandrakirti says that asserting that asserting things to have some objective existence would actually tantamount to say that the absorption, the meditative absorption of Arya beings on emptiness would actually be an agent to destroy entities, and also that the ultimate phenomena is something that can actually be an absolute existence, and then that it also is tantamount to say that things do not are not empty of their inherent existence. But and then in a sutra it says that the emptiness is a form is not made empty by emptiness. And so whatever entity you bring up, if you actually search for its identity within itself, you cannot actually find anything that you can pinpoint as being this or that. So things are things exist by way of convention, by way of renown in the world. So if you analyze the things with the sevenfold reasoning, you cannot find anything being existing through this kind of analysis. But then, apart from this, things do exist by way of convention, Master Chandrakirti says. And so, on the one hand, we say that things have no independent objective existence, but then that doesn't mean that things do not exist, but they do exist by way of convention, by way of the worldly renown. So when you destroy the objectification in things, then saying that things do not exist independently but by way of convention, and it actually helps to destroy the objectification in things, and therefore you will not have exaggerated way of looking at things, like inappropriate thinking, and because of that you will not have the negative emotions, which in turn leads to create karmas and then suffering, and so these also will not exist. So the space itself too is only name. So without the elements, how could form exist? Line 3, verse 99. So in other words, whether things are composite or uncompounded phenomena, they do not exist independently, or they have no essential existence in and of themselves, but by way of name. And therefore, even name only does not exist. So So when you do deity yoga practice on a daily basis, I actually recite this verse whenever I do the deity yoga practice. So this is a very powerful verse. So this line where it says, therefore even the name only does not exist, is very powerful. So we usually actually hang on to some name to identify things, but even that, when we say even that does not have any independent existence, and then it's quite intriguing. So with regard to the earlier verses, verse number 80 and 81, these can be used to analyze or to understand the selflessness of persons. And this verse can be used to understand the selflessness of phenomena as well. So verse number 100, and then this first chapter of Precious Garland, indication of high status and definite goodness, is finished. So this is the most important chapter of this text. So with regard to, we already touched on the topic of selflessness. Just as when a banana tree with all its parts is torn apart, there's nothing. So when a person having the 6 constituents is divided, it is the same. So I have nothing much to say. The verse, apart from being designated with convention, verse number 114. Thus it has a nature beyond these 3 times, other than as an imputation of a convention. What world is there, in fact, which would exist or not? So Je Rinpoche gives 3 criteria for conventional existence. That it must be renounced in convention, and then, although it may be renounced, but then if you have some kind of a wrong perception or misperception of things, the object cannot exist. So whatever is known in the world does not necessarily need to be existent. So it must be a renowned something to exist must fulfill these 3 criteria, which are that they are conventionally renowned, and that convention is not undermined by any other convention, and that it is not undermined by the analysis into the final nature of things. So the Chittamantras do assert alaya vijnana, or as the identity, final identity of a person. And this is actually, they come to this conclusion because of saying that things or a person must have an objective existence, and therefore it must be able to be found from within the aggregates, and they point to this alaya vijnana. But when you do further analysis into this, you cannot actually assert that such a person. So something that is conventionally existent is renowned in the world as conventional, but that convention must not be undermined by other conventions. So when you say things are merely in name, when the Madhyamakas say that, it does not mean that they're neither does it mean that there is an object that is not the name, nor mere name alone without the object. So from the point of view of those, the Madhyamakas who assert that there is not even in convention, even an iota of objective independent existence, for them to say that things are merely name does not become difficult. So, other than those of the meditative absorption of Arya beings, meditative absorption on emptiness, all the other perceptions of sentient beings are said to be tinged with this appearance of true existence. And then the question is, how do you actually establish a valid cognition? Although we see, for example, a vase, to the perception of that vase, visual perception, there is an appearance of the vase existing independently or truly. But to that perception, the object, the vase, which is defined as that which is an object that has a bulging belly and holding, being able to contain water and so forth. So that is what also appears. And so from that perspective, that perception can be said to be a valid perception with regard to in relation to its main object. And so the Savatrantika Madhyamakas say that this true existence, which is the object to be negated when you establish emptiness, does not appear to the sensory perceptions, whereas the Prasangikas say that it does appear to the sensory perception. So when the body, which is unclean, verse number 116, coarse and an object of the senses, 116, Gyata Judu, no. So from this verse down, when the Buddha taught the four characteristics of the four 16 characteristics of the Four Noble Truths. The first Noble Truth's characteristics are impermanence, suffering, empty and selflessness. So although this may be a very gross understanding of the nature of things compared to that of emptiness, yet we need to train our mind from through this kind of understanding of the gross nature of things. Does not stay in the mind as having a nature of uncleanness and pain, although it is continually in view. Then how could this doctrine, which is most subtle, profound, baseless, and not manifest, easily appear to the mind? Realizing that because of its profundity, this doctrine is difficult for beings to understand, the subduer, having become enlightened, at first turned away from teaching doctrine. So as I mentioned, as I gave the verse before, the Buddha kept silent after becoming enlightened in the forest by saying, I found this nectar-like teaching, or Dharma, which is profound, peaceful, and so forth. And even if I were to teach it to others, nobody will understand. Therefore, I will keep silent and remain in the forest. So The Madhyamaka is that view where you stay in between without falling into the two extremes of nihilism and eternalism. Because if you fall into nihilism or eternalism, you also create lots of negative emotions and so forth. And so, by staying in the middle, the middle way view, you could still engage in the practices of compassionate practices of serving others through giving and so forth. And this is possible when you see that things do not have any independent solid existence, but that they are like illusion. And so within this perspective or understanding of things being merely apparent to you, you could still engage in these practices. Because you see that things do come through causes and conditions, that they are dependent on causes and conditions, and therefore you can create those causes and conditions to bring happiness to others and so forth. As the seventh Dalai Lama also says, which I also recite every day, at this crossroad of the six perceptions, there is a hazy appearance which has no basis. Do not think that there is something independent or true existence. And look at the nature of emptiness. And so when you see this emptiness, what happens is all the diversities of appearances disappear from your perception, as the Dalai Lama, seventh Dalai Lama also says. Just as the clouds dissipate in the sky and in the autumn sky, likewise within this mind realizing emptiness, all the appearances or diversities of appearances disappear. And then in the Jonang tradition, there is also this verse which says, this illusion-like appearance is bare or naked before me, which shows that there is an appearance to one's conceptual mind, things just appearing, whereas this imperceptible or this clear-light mind appears clearly, which cannot be shown. And so, regarding both subject and object, nothing can be said to have any independent existence. Therefore, they are inexpressible. And so, and then the final verse of this Jonang verse says that everything rolls into this great bliss. So these verses show the uncleanliness of our body. So we should Verse number 126, O Lord, a Lord of the earth who performs actions with the prior, intermediary and final practice is not harmed here or in the future. So with regard to practicing Dharma, well, the most important thing is always to be honest, non-deceptive and kind to others. Always thinking of helping others, caring about others. Then you will have more friends, trusted friends. So with Dharma, what it helps is you have fame in this life. And then at the time of death, if you have been practicing the Dharma well, you will not have regret. So because of your altruistic practices, which will help you, as the Master Shantideva makes this prayer, as long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, may I too abide to dispel the miseries of these beings. So with altruism, you will have happiness and joy, and called immediately as well as in the long run, and it helps oneself as well as others. So since this text was written for a king, Master Nagarjuna exhorts the king with these other practices. Because if the if the king does things wrongly, then it would cause lots of harm to many. Good. So we touched the point of uncleanliness of the body, which we actually hold on to having some kind of a clean. So next one touches on death. So you know, when you know that you are about to die, I can't. So whatever resources and wealth and so forth, the excellent things a king may have, such as great relatives and so forth, as well as power, fame and so forth. In the end, everyone has to die. 100 years from now, maybe few people who are now gathered here may be alive. So those, even those who may be alive then, would be very old and frail, not even being able to support themselves when they walk or so. And so what we are touching on is whether there is past and future lives. So with regards to the external matter, if you look at, it's 10 o'clock already, we will have a break here. So this is a fault of the alcohol. So you forget things and you also deplete your resources. It says, I don't find that verse. So in the beginning, in order to obtain a good high status or rebirth, we should have a very clear state of mind. And since alcohol actually obstructs or hinders that, yesterday I saw and heard on BBC News, when a mother, a pregnant mother, takes too much alcohol, it actually harms the child, the fetus. So this is a fault of taking alcohol. On the one hand, if you become totally drunk, people will despise you, look down upon you. And not only that, Changila, that's it. So these intoxicants 146 on page 49. And then next, as the desire realm beings of the desire realm, there is this attachment or towards essential objects such as sight, sound, smell, touch, and particularly with regard to touch, the touch of the experience of sex. So the text goes through the different faults of women's body. And then for those of women and especially the nuns, in order to meditate on the uncleanliness of the male's body, it would help. And so sometimes some feminists have told me that the Master Shantideva was not good because he despises women's body. So, actually, you should understand that Shantideva taught the Bodhisattvacharya Avatara in a gathering of monks, and therefore he emphasizes the monks to stresses the monks to meditate on the unclean body of the women. And so this text goes through the developing the sense of understanding the faults of the sight, sound, and so forth, of women. The uncleanliness of the women. And so sometimes I ordain Westerners and tell them that when you look at some couples, there are so much problem because if they're not able to get a child, they have some, they worry, and if they have children, then again they have more problems. And sometimes some people prefer the girls than boys, and then there are also problems not having girls. And then people also take to sterilization. And then once you have children, you also worry about their education, their livelihood when they grow up. And so for monks and nuns, we live as individuals. So if you are alone, you don't have any worries. Even if you are alone, you don't worry about my husband, my spouse, and so children, and so forth. For us, so I tell them to actually look at the world and see all these problems that the couples have, and to be able to keep their vows. There is a pleasure when a sword is scratched, but to be without sword is more pleasurable. So So yempa actually means feeling itchy. And so if you have some itch, you would have to scratch yourself. And so you feel quite good once you scratch the itch. But if you don't have the itching, you don't, it's more pleasurable. So if you are very desirous and greedy, and you may be very happy when you get all those things that you desire, but the more desirous and greedy you are, there is greater anxiety and then jealousy and competitive sense of competition, and these also grow. So for your own sustenance, of course, you need the different facilities, the resources, but to have too much is actually a source of extra pain. So just so there are the pleasures in the world they desire, but to be without desire is more pleasurable still. So in the past, the Indian kings used to kill animals for game. So to hunt game is horrible, cause of short life and so forth. So just as the Buddhas have the major and minor marks, the universal monarchs also have some kind of a semblance of those major and minor marks of a great being. And so with this we end the second chapter. So with regard to the major and minor marks of the Buddhas, they are compounded phenomena, and therefore they come through causes. So the Buddha's the form body comes through merit, the collection of merit, and the Dharmakaya comes through wisdom, collection of wisdom. So the 32 major marks and 80 minor marks are enumerated in this third chapter, which have actually come through huge amount of merit and wisdom, collections of these two. So how could we may find them quite amazing and even unbelievable. How could these how could one actually accumulate such a huge amount of merit and wisdom? So actually, when you are told that you need to collect wisdom and accumulate or wisdom and merit for over 300 countless eons, it should inspire you to engage in the practice leading to the goal of Buddhahood. But for us, instead of feeling encouraged, we feel discouraged when you thinking about such a long time to engage in the practices, whereas we talk about becoming enlightened in 3 years, within 3 years or 12 years and so forth. And so I usually say that this is like a propaganda, communist propaganda. So regardless of what, how long you may take to become enlightened, or regardless of how much effort you might have to put to become enlightened, you should, if you have that kind of courage to engage in the practices, that would inspire you to engage in the bodhisattva practices leading to that goal.
지구단의 놈 때문에 운신지를 둘이 전주들을 써놓으면 늘 이루미죠. 서로 걸어. 순서. 그래. 짱아. 짱만이 씨.
Mindajlag de suri dillag sikje angi.
어떻게 대파이. 처음 꾸준 나가서 싸서 주던 매듭로 지들 타에 대신 동해 심지 타에 저 동해나 심지 타에 들어갔다. 너무 나는 자산에 저는 수학사 장을 되었어. 대상으로
민데 suri dillag.
청소인데 대화들이 대화폰
So we understand that there are so many different species in the world who, although want happiness, they are deprived of happiness. So if you have bodhicitta, which is this intention to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, and then next topic touches on what are known as the four inconceivables or immeasurables. So for an inconceivable number of inconceivable length of time, you engage in the practices of collecting the merit and wisdom, which are also limitless or inconceivable, and reach that inconceivable state of Buddhahood. So when you have such a courage to engage in these practices to reach the goal, even your life is dedicated for the benefit of others. As Shantideva says, you collect huge amount of merit. Even once you have generated the venturing bodhicitta and made the pledge or taken the bodhisattva vows, even when you are sleeping and so forth. So by understanding emptiness, feel convinced that once you feel convinced that the enlightenment is possible, and you engage, decisively to engage in the practices of bodhisattvas to help others, there is no danger of falling into the lower realms of existence. With that motivation of bodhicitta, it is 100% sure, I can guarantee that you will have a higher rebirth and in the form of human life, in the next life. So you'll be able to also engage in practices that serve, the practices of serving others from life after life. So mental suffering comes because of our attachment and anger, which in turn ensue from this inappropriate thinking. And that can be ended or destroyed when you actually destroy all objectification in things. (225) So 226. So hence do not feel inadequate thinking Buddhahood is far away. Always strive at these collections to remove defects and attain good qualities. So these are very powerful. These are actually said through reasoning to overcome our self-cherishing attitude by showing the disadvantage and the shortcomings of a self-cherishing attitude. So when we talk about helping, thinking of or caring about others and cherishing others over oneself, it doesn't mean you have to actually abandon or forsake your own happiness. What you are actually doing is, in this practice of altruism, going against or countering this self-cherishing attitude, which has been the main cause of one's own suffering and all kinds of misfortune that has befallen oneself. So if you are wise, you should be called wisely selfish, which means that you think of helping others, caring about others, or more than oneself, and as a result, what happens is you benefit and through this altruistic attitude, whereas we have been foolishly selfish, only thinking of ourselves and not being able to fulfill that in either.
Wise selfish rather than foolish selfish. Very clear. This is the Oh yeah, the thought was and some time charge
16.
Then the
and then there are verses which talk about community service. So this is maybe he skipped some page. Shugin the Surah 335 last time. So I'm confused. I'm supposed to be the one giving your teaching, but I'm confused. So, this only seems to have misplaced one folio. This verse talks about if you wish to happiness, reach the highest enlightenment for oneself and others, you should cultivate compassion, bodhicitta, and then this understanding of non-duality. So this verse shows that the highest attainment for oneself and others, which helps oneself and others as well, you should cultivate bodhicitta, and bodhicitta comes through that of compassion, which actually looks at all sentient beings without any discrimination, and that compassion also must be coupled with the understanding of emptiness. And so, with regard to those that of enlightenment or bodhicitta, what you actually focus on with compassion, you focus on the animal, sentient beings, sorry, and with wisdom you focus on enlightenment, Buddhahood. And so, with the understanding of emptiness, you will actually be able to identify what enlightenment is. So, without having understanding of emptiness, you will not be able to see how to overcome this, how you'll be able to overcome the negative emotions and the imprints or residual stains. And so, with the understanding of emptiness, you'll be able to overcome the negative emotions, the disturbing emotions, and with the help of bodhicitta, what happens is you'll be able to even eliminate the stain or the imprint of the negative emotions as well, and reach omniscience. So without understanding emptiness, you will just say, there is something called enlightenment or nirvana and so forth. But when you understand called emptiness, you'll be able to reason out the why, the need for enlightenment and so forth. So with compassion, you will have the sense of wishing others to be out of suffering. So if you see you can see some animals actually helping each other when one is injured, another animal or dog, for example, would lick that wounded animal. It's verse number 286. Marisha, Mare. No. Which beings to generate So when you actually understand emptiness well, then you see how we are bound in samsara through these negative emotions, which could be overcome through it, and therefore you see the possibility of enlightenment for yourself, and then you also see the others to be bound or in this bondage of samsara because of their holding on to things having some kind of absolute objective existence, which cause them to create karma and therefore rebirth and suffering in samsara. And so you could actually generate compassion towards others on that basis. And so one's wishing to attain the highest enlightenment or Buddhahood should generate or cultivate these principles of compassion, bodhicitta, and the understanding of non-duality or emptiness. So having touched on bodhicitta, then the text goes through the practice of generosity and so forth that the king must engage in. So with regard to bodhicitta, and then in the 4th chapter, so from the disciples' scriptures, the bodhisattva practices and so forth are not taught. So even if you don't find the verse, if you understand the meaning, that would be okay. So in the Pali tradition, the Buddha taught the 4 Noble Truths, and it's their 16 characteristics. And then when the workings of negative emotions, the origin of suffering and the suffering are taught in more detail, the Buddha gave the 12 links of teaching on the 12 links of dependent origination. And then also in connection with that, the Buddha gave the practice of the 37 wings of enlightenment in the Pali tradition. So these are common or shared teachings even in the Prajnaparamita teachings. But Prajnaparamita teachings or sutras emphasize on the 6 perfections. 6 perfections such as giving, morality, effort, joyous effort, patience, and concentration, which are said to, which are actually taught in conjunction with the understanding of emptiness, or to be practiced in conjunction with the understanding of emptiness. And so, the perfection of wisdom. And the perfection of wisdom, in turn, is taught in connection with that of the bodhicitta, where if the understanding of emptiness is coupled with or influenced by the bodhicitta, then that becomes a perfection of wisdom and so forth. So the mere teaching of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma doesn't give the entire teaching of Buddha. On top of that, we need to add those of the practices which are implicitly taught in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, and together with those of the perfections which are taught explicitly, the perfection of wisdom. And then you should go into the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, which emphasizes the subjective mind, which is the clear light mind, using that to realize emptiness. And since there are two types of obscurations, which are afflictive, disturbing emotions, which hinder us from reaching nirvana, and then the imprints left by those disturbing emotions, which hinder us from reaching omniscient state of Buddhahood. And so, with regard to the teaching, the Mahayana teachings, the sutras, there are in Bhaviveka's Tarkajivala, he actually proves that those sutras are teachings of the Buddha himself. And then in Shantideva's text, as well as other texts, there is argument for Mahayana teachings being the teaching of the Buddha. And so the fourth chapter is advised to the king. So then by engaging in the practice, which is not a practice where you don't divorce the method and the wisdom from each other, then you will actually be able to traverse the bodhisattva grounds and the paths. So the bodhisattva paths, like the bodhisattva path of accumulation and preparation, and then the bodhisattva grounds, beginning with from the path of seeing upwards. The 10 bodhisattva grounds are taught in this chapter. So, on a daily basis, accumulating merit and wisdom. For that, to remind yourself of these practices, towards the end of this 5th chapter, so there's a prostration to the objects of veneration, the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and so forth. So first it gives the 7 limbs. To 472 on page 102. And so may all women at all times become supreme persons. With regard to this verse, His Holiness says that the men's body is considered more superior to the women's body because of the physical strength and so forth, which also are kind of favorable conditions for practicing the Dharma. So in the beginning, when human communities developed, people were living by hunting, and then slowly people lived in communities and shared whatever they have together, and then later farming began, and then people actually got their harvest and collected them together, and when there were some miscreants at that time, people began to think about having some leader in their communities. And at that time, the leadership was actually, people were appointed as leaders on the basis of their physical strength, and because there were no education was not there as such, and therefore male dominance started because of that kind of a trend in society. And then, even in religious organizations, male dominance took the upper hand. But gradually, when education spread, it created equality between genders. And so,
now time has come. The existing education alone not sufficient. We must have more sense of concern of others' well-being. So that's compassion, love, compassion. So now time come, we must make special effort for promotion of compassion or sense of concern of others' well-being. In that respect, according to scientists, the female, the biologically more sensitive about others' pain. So therefore, now time comes, female should take more active role regarding promotion of human inner value. That is human affection, human compassion. So therefore, this sort of prayer,
so if you just pray all women to become supreme persons or males, then we would come to the end of human race. So you don't have to think literally regarding these lines. So whether you are male or female, if you are weak physically, you cannot serve others well, and therefore you could actually make a prayer for having a good, strong body in order to serve others, for everyone. For 75. Completing the two collections of merit and wisdom, may they have the brilliant marks and beautiful features, and may they cross without interruption in the 10 inconceivable grounds. May I also be adorned completely with those and all other good qualities, be freed from all defects, and have the superior love for the all sentient beings. May I perfect all the virtues for which all sentient beings hope, and may I always relieve the suffering of all embodied beings. May those beings in all worlds who are distressed through fear become entirely fearless, even through merely hearing my name. Through seeing this, seeing or thinking of me, or only hearing my name, may beings attain great joy, naturalness, free from errors, definiteness towards complete enlightenment. The main prayer that you can use is May I always be an object of enjoyment for all sentient beings according to their wish and without interference as the earth, water, fire, wind, herbs and wild forests. May I be as dear to sentient beings as their own life, and may they be even more dear to me, and so forth. So as long as sentient beings, any sentient being anywhere has not liberated. So these three verses, if possible, you should recite these three verses, 483 to 485. Just as Master Shantideva also makes this prayer, as long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, and so forth. So do your best to engage, to think of benefiting others. So if the merit of saying this had form, it would never fit into the realm of world as numerous as the sand grains of the Ganges. The Supreme Victor said so, and the reasoning is this: the limitlessness of this merit of wishing to help limitless realms of sentient beings is like the limitlessness of those beings, and so forth. So I have briefly touched on the practice of bodhisattvas and bodhicitta. These practices that I have explained, verse 488, briefly to you in this way should be as dear to you as your body and always. So these teachings were not given only to the king, but also to us, and therefore we should engage in practices pertinent to cultivating bodhicitta and cultivate compassion. And that brings about bodhicitta within yourself, so that you are able to engage in the practices of the four limitless practices to reach the highest goal of enlightenment. So I do teach these texts to others as well as practice it myself. So Mullah Madhyamaka Karika teaches on emptiness, and then this precious Garland emphasizes on the bodhicitta practice. So this text is very important because it is the text which Master Chandrakirti actually refers to when he, in his Madhyamaka Avatara, and its commentary when he refers to the extensive practice of bodhicitta. So read this on it whenever you have time, and then think about it. And if you could actually make some transformation within yourself by using this text, I mean, you will also feel grateful to Master Nagarjuna, and that would in turn please Guru, Master Nagarjuna as well. And then the Master Buddhas and Bodhisattvas also would be pleased by your practice. So there's no greater practice than doing the practice of bodhicitta, and no greater offering that you could make than making offering of your practice. So making offering to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas could be done on the basis of practicing this text. So it would help in this life as well as in the next lives. And so this will actually lay the foundation for your attainment of Buddhahood as well. By being able to do the practice, and in this life you'll be able to continue the practice in the next life and so forth.
Now tomorrow, same time, about 8, right? Little earlier.
Little earlier than today.
Actually 8 o'clock.
Please be here by 8.
Okay.
And we will start at 8 actually. Oh, I know, what's this? So many. I took out 1 and 3.